When I told my wife that I intended to write down some stories from my childhood, she laughed at me for a long time. Memoirs, she said, are written either by old people who have nothing else to do in life, or by young people who have achieved great success and think that their experience might be useful to someone else. Which of these categories do you fall into? I didn't fall under any of these definitions. I was still far from old age, and in my 30s, I was swamped with things to do. But I didn't have any special accomplishments, not that I was a loser without a dime to my name, just a regular person with a regular job, a good family, and an average income. Everything is normal and nothing outstanding, no special experience that could be useful to other people. Nevertheless, the desire to write about my childhood was firmly planted inside me. It grew and grew, and I decided to give it a try despite the taunts of my precious wife, if only because now I still very well remember the period of my growing up, and in my old age, who knows what joke of my memory will play on me. Perhaps some important details I will no longer remember. Meanwhile, the events that happened to me I would like to convey as fully and in detail as possible. I had no plans to publish my notes, but I thought that my sons, when they grew up, would be interested to know about the past of their father and his relatives. And then, I began with the most important story, in my opinion, the one that turned the entire life of the family in which I grew up 180 degrees, and thanks to which I became, in many ways, what I am now. In my childhood, I could not boast of an abundance of relatives. Our family was small, me, my younger brother, and of course, my mother. An old lady neighbor from the third floor of our house called me and my brother fatherless. The words seemed funny and a little strange to me, as well as the old woman herself. My mother said that before, in the days of this neighbor's youth, the word was considered offensive, and women who raised children without husbands did not fit into the then norms of morality and were condemned by society. Things are different now, she'd say. I've got half a class of kids growing up without a father. What's the big deal? Nobody cares, and everybody respects their moms. By the way, if you're offended that your grandmother talks like that, just spit on her. Mom smiled at these words and stroked my head. My brother and I had a father, of course, until about my 5th birthday. I remember him a little bit, even though as the years went by, his image became more and more blurred and indistinct. Even then, in the years about which I am telling the story, I would hardly recognize him if I met him on the street. And he never came home to us, nor did any of his relatives. My mother turned them all away. My parents had once lived a happy and friendly life. They married for love. It was my father who came up with the names for me and my brother. He named me Robert and his brother, born 3 years later, Jay. Dad's own name was the Noble Winston. When I was 5 years old, someone brought it to my mom's attention that my dad had a mistress, and not just a mistress, but practically a second family. He had been seeing this woman for most of my life, seemingly since Mom was pregnant with me. When my mom found out that woman was expecting my dad's baby, my mom confronted my dad, and he confessed everything, the affair and the future baby. And after that, he disappeared from our apartment and our lives forever. Mom was proud. She couldn't forgive such a betrayal. She broke off all relations with the man she loved and from whom she gave birth to 2 sons. She also gave up her former father-in-law, her father's sister, and all his other relatives. She didn't want to see anyone who reminded her of the man who had betrayed her, Julia. For the boy's sake, her grandmother begged her, they should know their father, their family, their relatives. My boys don't need such a family, Mom answered firmly, and her former mother-in-law could only accept it. And so it was just the 3 of us, and so Jay and I became fatherless at an early age. It didn't bother us. I can't say I ever lacked a male role model in front of me or a father's support. Somehow, I managed without it. But I missed my grandparents for some reason, especially my grandfather. He was wonderful, smart, funny, understanding, strict but fair. By the way, he was the only one of all my father's relatives who apologized to my mother and then said, "Julie, I'm sorry. I failed to bring up my son to be a decent man. I will try not to repeat your mistakes and raise my sons as normal people." replied the mom, then, and closed the door in front of the grandfather. So we lost our grandparents. Mom did not want to see anyone who would remind her of her father, of his betrayal, of the humiliation she suffered. But luckily for us, it didn't concern us. All these are my children and mine alone, Mother always told neighbors, friends, and other curious people. We never heard from her in her address phrases that often send divorced, resentful of ex-husbands women like her father or as rude as your dad. Nothing like that. After the divorce, Mom, of course, became a little drier, a little stricter, and tougher, but my brother and I were loved and spoiled as much as she could. She tried very hard to give us everything we needed, not just for life, but for a happy childhood. When Dad left, Jay was only 2 years old. My mom was still on maternity leave, and we lived on my dad's paycheck. It was a good life, by the way, as I realize now. Left on her own, my mom started looking for work and eventually got a job as a spice storekeeper at a sausage and egg factory. Yes, they add a lot of different things to sausages, not only salt and pepper, some coloring and flavoring agents, sauce for smoking, and ordinary seasonings. The assortment is huge, and our mother was in charge of it all. She received spices, was responsible for their storage, gave the necessary amount to the shop where they prepared sausage and smoked meats, kept records, commanded the movers. It was hard for her, who had once graduated from an institute with a humanitarian specialty, to get into warehouse work. In addition, after several years of such work, she developed severe allergies. Sit all day in a room filled with all sorts of smells in a warehouse where there is literally a veil of fine dust, seasonings, and flavorings. From a runny nose, my mother saved herself with antihistamines, consuming them in packs. Those pills had side effects, and not just drowsiness. Little by little, they were crippling my mom's health. By the time the story I want to tell began, our mom's condition was on the verge of normal, but she kept going to her warehouse. She'd be in charge of the spices for a day, but then she'd be home with me and my brother for 2 days. I suspect that schedule was the only reason she held on to that job. The factory didn't pay much. Well, I guess for a single person with no family and no special needs, this salary would be quite suitable. But for a woman bringing up 2 boys who grow faster than clothes and shoes can wear out, and besides, the boys themselves are always hungry, it was not much money at all. We lived modestly, ate simple food, dressed at the local market. Attended free sections which did not require additional investments. Jay, I remember, dreamed of hockey for a while, but when my mom calculated the annual costs of skates and equipment, that dream had to be abandoned. Sorry son, we can't afford it, she said sadly. Maybe someday later, not the kids club, but the youth club. Jay courageously sniffed his nose and agreed. We'd known about living frugally since we were kids, but we wouldn't be real adventurous boys if we didn't try to overcome our financial constraints. For example, I have already mentioned that we were always hungry, and we were always hungry for sweets. We usually had the cheapest store-bought cookies or my mom's baked goods in the house. Chocolate bars and other store-bought goodies were bought only once a month on payday to pamper us. Fruit was the same, bananas and apples, that was our limit. No exotics, not even just watermelons or cherries, expensive, but we wanted it. Our dreams began to come true when a big grocery store opened near our house. At first, Jay and I just went to it like a museum, looking at the goods, marveling at how many different delicious things there are in the world, looking at the price tags and recalculating the cost of each delicious thing in our pocket money. Often, it turned out that a chocolate bar cost as much as my mother gave us for a week, and fruit, Jay was fascinated by the dragon's eye, those scales, and the pink-red fruit just beckoned to him, but the price tag on it made my brother sad. It looked like he wouldn't get a chance to try it until he grew up and got a job with a good salary. One day, we walked around the supermarket until the evening. After looking at the brightly colored wrappers and richly filled windows, we didn't want to go home. We decided to take a little walk and went around the store building. For some reason, we had never looked in there before, but suddenly, we went in and saw a picture of that shakar. Imagine, there were trash cans at the back of the store, and a couple of movers were unloading boxes, bags, and crates of groceries from the back entrance of the supermarket. Jay groaned with injustice and outrage. I was shocked too. That store had thrown out enough food in one evening to feed the three of us for a month, and there would have been more left over. Is that really possible? Oh, it's expired, there was a man's voice behind him. Let's go look what they're giving us today before the dough piles up, another man answered him. Two shabby-looking men walked past us. The movers had already finished their work and left. We were not taken seriously, so they had no one to be embarrassed about. The men started going through the bins, commenting on what they found. Oh, smoked sausage and brisket, would you like some cheese? It's a little moldy, but it's good as an appetizer. Pickles are good for appetizers too. Wow, there's fruit crates here. Are there any fresh cucumbers in there? No, they just threw out some exotic stuff. Bananas I can understand, but what's with the pink stuff? The man was twirling a dragon's eye in his hand, scrutinizing it with distaste. Curiosity. It's a dragon's eye. Jay suddenly raised his voice. Uncle, since you don't need it, please give it to me. I've wanted to try it for a long time. Wow, the man grinned. Why don't you ask your mom and dad if you want to try it? No, Daddy. Jay lowered his gaze, sniffed his nose, and added shivers and tragedy to his voice. He was good at it when he needed to be. No, Daddy, it's expensive for Mom. She's pulling us both as hard as she can. He raised his eyes to the man, so bright and pure. The man gave in. Here, he said, handing my brother the fruit. Oh wait, there's a couple more of these. It's a good idea to try them. And we came home holding an armful of almost 2 kilograms of dragon eyes. A little cold here, even rotting, but that didn't bother us. Remembering our mother's advice, we washed them thoroughly, laid them out on the table, and began to wonder what to do with them. In the end, we decided to cut them in half and scrape out the pulp with spoons. Jay happily started eating, 2 in a row, and then said, a little disappointed, strange, such a beautiful fruit, and so tasteless, like a cucumber, only sweeter and with more seeds. At least you got your dream come true, I encouraged my brother, although I didn't like it too much either. We put the rest of the fruit in the fridge, deciding to surprise Mom in the morning, and she was surprised. Oh yeah, and when she found out where we got all that fruit, she got mad. Are you crazy? She said in a stern, indignant voice. Digging in the garbage, it's full of filth and contagion. There are rats, cockroaches, these bins are treated with various poisons, you could catch an infection from them, and it's good if you'd only end up with an upset stomach. What if you'd been poisoned? Do you want to go to the hospital for a week and vomit? As far as you can see, Mom, we weren't digging, Jay tried to explain. The uncles were digging, we just saw it and asked them for it. They didn't need it. I was so excited to try it. It's beautiful. Look, my artistic brother put into these phrases all his ability to make anyone feel sorry for him, but those tricks rarely worked on Mom. It's beautiful, she agreed, but why didn't you just ask me, and I would have gone out and bought it. It's expensive, I explained. Very, they throw away so much expensive food there, we have enough for a month. Mom, that's not right, why don't they just give it away for free? Because it's already spoiled, Mom explained, you can't eat it, it's past its expiration date. Look, your fruit's a little rotten, and this one's damaged, I don't know what could have gotten into that cut. You don't throw away food that's good, this is garbage. There was even sausage in there for some reason, Jay said. I don't care if it was honey cake, Mom was outraged. And after all, rummaging through trash is just shameful. Only people who can't afford to buy normal food do that, and only because they don't want to work and earn money for it. These are the lowest strata of society, you know, bums and vagrants, alcoholics, people that no one will respect. Do you want to be seen as the same, or do you want to embarrass me in front of the whole yard? If one neighbor saw you there, the whole house would be buzzing by tomorrow. Julia can't provide food for her sons. What about you? Jay blinked his nose, and I lowered my head in shame. We'd never thought of it that way. Mom, what are we going to do with the fruit? My brother asked. Bring it back where you found it, answered Mom. Why don't you try at least one of them? Let's choose the most normal one, I suggested. We washed them with soap and water, and they were all edible inside anyway. Somehow, we got Mom to try one, and she surprisingly liked the fruit. It tasted good, she said, kind of like a kiwi. What's a kiwi? Jay jumped in. I'll buy you some tomorrow, Mom promised, but only if you never, ever go through the garbage cans again. We promised, but the next day, we regretted it. Remember when they used to throw away yogurt? Jay was thinking out loud. Whole packages and corn sticks, I echoed. And oranges, but we promised Mom. But we promised we wouldn't go through the cans, Jay objected. We won't, we'll just ask the uncles to get us some again. That was an option. Technically we hadn't broken our promise, and the abundance of food was beckoning, so we headed out to the back of the supermarket again. We lied to Mom about going for a walk. She was on her day off that day, so we had to be extra careful about hiding. Once again, we watched the unloading of expired products while standing nearby, and this time we saw a few clear containers of pastries among them. The eclairs made us completely forget the promises we had made the day before. Soon, the men from yesterday appeared and started to gut the bags again. This time, we approached them with a specific request. The men were not interested in cakes, and they easily gave us the containers. Where are we going to wash them? Jay asked as we settled down with our loot in our secret place behind the garages in the corner of the yard. Why wash them? I answered lightly, they're in the package, it's dirty, and the cakes themselves are clean. And we started eating. Since that day, we began to visit the back of the supermarket almost every day and found out a lot of interesting things. For example, that many people, not only homeless people and alcoholics, do not shy away from the bins. The same grandmother from the third floor that called us fatherless very cheerfully pulled out of the dumpster cucumbers, eggplants, tomatoes, and potatoes. Later, we saw her with these vegetables at the local market. The old woman told the customers that she was selling her country harvest. Among the helpers were hippies, teenagers dressed rather expensively but somewhat sloppily. They loaded the produce into large backpacks they had brought with them, and they were very happy when among the discarded food there were cans with low-alcohol cocktails. These guys shared sweets quite willingly, but yogurt or creamy desserts, it was hard to get a couple of glasses from them. We saw some of our neighbors at the bins too. They rummaged through the bags, looking around wearily, and took mostly food to be cooked later. I thought that they probably wanted to protect themselves from possible contagion. On a raw apple, for example, there can be various germs, but if you wash it and boil the compost, most of the germs can be eliminated. The same with cereals, pasta, sausages. However, I could not confirm my hunch. We hid from the neighbors as they hid from us and other unwanted witnesses. We didn't want to embarrass ourselves and especially not to spoil Mom's reputation. After all, we knew for sure that the same tenants who were picking through the overdue goods today, if they noticed us here tomorrow, they would wash our family's bones with no less care. Over the course of a couple of months, we learned the contingent of specialty food hunters backwards and forwards. We already knew who came at what time, who chose what, who we could approach with a request to share or get something tasty, and who we shouldn't. Yes, there were such people, most often from the category of homeless people, who simply sent us a swear word in response to our requests. There were also those who were greedy. We don't have enough for ourselves. Ask your mother. I have nothing to feed my children. That was their usual response. Still, most of the time, our begging, yes, now from the height of my years, I can call it that, ended successfully. We tried almost the entire assortment of sweets, desserts, yogurts which were present in this store. We didn't ignore the fruits either. How could we not? There were 5 varieties of oranges alone. Now we often wandered between the showcases, looking at the price tags under the chocolate and cakes and teasing each other. Oh look, and that's the $20 cookie we had yesterday. Wow, I'd like to try this dessert for $15. I wonder when they're going to write it off. We had a lot of fun on these walks. Sometimes, if we got something really good, we'd bring it to Mom. We'd lie to her about what we'd bought with the pocket money we'd saved. Of course, we didn't have to, but first of all, we wanted to treat her, and secondly, we were a little ashamed. We realized that we were committing, in general, not the most plausible actions. Although formally, we did not break the promise, but somehow, underlyingly, we were trying to make amends. In the winter, we began to go to the backyard of the supermarket only once every 3 days. When my mother was at work, eating our prey in the backyard became uncomfortable as the cold weather set in. We didn't have a warm secret place. Well, we could not bring sweets obtained by forbidden method home, no way. In order not to take any risks, we changed the frequency of visits, and therefore did not notice how a newcomer appeared among our volunteer helpers, an elderly, even almost old man with sharp face and shabby clothes. He was active, talked to everyone he saw around him, commented cheerfully on his prey, and took mostly bread and smoked meat for himself, giving the rest to his hunting colleagues. He did not seem at all embarrassed about his occupation, but he made so much noise that the company near the tanks invariably attracted the attention of casual passers-by, so we began to keep away from it. We didn't want to be seen, you see. People are unlikely to stare at a man rummaging in a dumpster. They glance at him and quickly avert their eyes, feeling some kind of squeamishness mixed with shame or contempt, the dregs of society. What is there to consider them? A person digging in a garbage can is to a passerby on the level of a lichen, a dirty stray dog, or say, a rat. You want to forget him as soon as possible. But only on the condition that it is an adult. If an honest and decent passerby notices a child near the tank, and not even inhibited but normal albeit cheaply dressed, he will certainly remember him and even come up to ask questions, offer help, call the police, in short, to fulfill his civic duty to help the minor. In this case, more often than not, they will make noise, but still will not help. But I learned this later, as I grew older. Then we just avoided excessive noise and tried to behave as quietly as possible. And if we saw an active grandfather near the tanks, we didn't go near them at all until he left. But one day, it happened that the old man newcomer was at the tanks alone, without interlocutors, and therefore noticed us. "Oh, young people," he said joyfully, "come here. I noticed you long ago. There is something for you here." He took out of the bags 2 packages of cookies and 1 ready-made cake and handed them to us. We looked at each other hesitantly, walked over, and took it. "Thank you," I said. "You're welcome," Grandpa laughed. "What's your name, boys?" "J. Robert." "Oh, noble names, aristocratic." "And I'm Alex, Grandpa Alex. I've had my eye on you for a long time. You've been standing on the sidelines. Why don't you come over? I often have sweets here. Would you like me to bring you some every day?" "We would," said Jay. "Can we pick them up at your house instead of here? Because my mom doesn't know we're here, and we don't want to upset her." "So, you're already at my house," Grandpa Alex laughed. "I made a dwelling for myself under that porch. There is a way down to the cellar, and the door is not locked, so I go there to warm up and sleep. But mostly, I sit under the porch, look at people, talk to them." "You live on the street?" I was surprised. Grandpa Alex didn't look like a bum. But why? Somehow it happened, he spread his hands with a smile. "But we have a deal. I'll pick out the sweets for you and stash them at my place, and when you come back, I'll give them to you. Go home," he laughed, "or you'll freeze." Grandpa Alex turned out to be an understanding man. He remembered that it was undesirable for us to shine by the garbage cans, and he never once gave us away by making noise. He never distracted me or Jay when he saw us, never made a move at all. He just packed his bags and moved toward the basement where he'd made his home. As he passed us, Grandpa Alex would make a sign to us, saying, "Follow me, guys," and we, after waiting a couple of minutes, followed him, looking around, ducked under the high porch, slipped through the door, and found ourselves in the secret hideout of our adult friend. Watching us greedily and with gusto, we gorged ourselves on cookies, breadcrumbs, chocolates, and fruit, and sometimes sausages and smoked meats. Alex's grandfather shook his head but kept quiet. A few days later, he said suddenly, "Doesn't Mom worry that you go out in the evenings? It's already fall, it gets dark early." Of course, you guys are adults, but still, anything can happen. We grown-up boys of 12 and 9 years old haughtily paused. Grandpa was right though, Mom had said the same thing many times. Why don't you drop by my house after school? Grandpa Alex suggested. You've been studying since morning. Well, come by after school and then go home. I'll keep your treats, don't worry, it won't spoil. I've built myself a refrigerator, he nodded haughtily at the basement window overlooking the street. There was a box on the windowsill in which grandfather put perishables. He had organized his corner well. At all, he had dragged in some pallets from which he had made a table, brought in a couple of old chairs from some dump, and covered the other windows with rags, except for the refrigerator window. I even have a faucet here, he said proudly, showing us his dwelling for the first time. You can drink water and wash yourself. Do people who live on the street wash? Jay asked. I was surprised too. I had never seen a clean bum or vagrant with clean clothes, although there were a lot of them in our neighborhood near the station. It depends on the person, Grandpa Alex explained stoically. Some find ways to wash themselves, and some don't even look for them. But I'll tell you, Prince Jay, so to say, in what a bind life has not thrown you. The main thing is to keep your human dignity, not to sink to the level of an animal, and for this purpose, it is necessary first of all to look after yourself, to keep clean, to keep yourself in order. What grade are you in, and you, Robert? Well, it's too early for you, but I'll tell you, he did tell us. He told us a lot of things during our sit-downs, about the history of our country, about how modern life is organized, how to live it properly, among other things. Uncle Alex explained to us why the supermarket throws away so many normal, generally speaking, products. We have noticed many times that there are fruits and vegetables without rot, yogurt and cookies with normal expiration dates, edible sausages and cuts of meat. Not once in all the time we'd been sampling the contents of the store's dump had Jay and I not only not gotten sick, but not even the slightest upset stomach, and I was constantly wondering how it all ended up in the trash. Jay took it easy. They're just stupid, that's what my little brother used to say about the supermarket owners. But I was older, I'd even tried working part-time in the summer, and I knew what money was. I knew that for every chocolate bar or packet of breadcrumbs, for every apple the store paid to buy them from suppliers, paid to resell them at a higher price, so why didn't it resell it and just throw it in the trash? Consider it a waste of your money, how's that? You see, Robert, Grandpa Alex explained, it's a little bit of a different system. It's important for the store to attract as many customers as possible, right? That's right. And to do that, you need to create a certain reputation, the reputation of an expensive, respectable store that sells only quality goods and always has everything a person who comes for shopping wants to buy, only the best. He needs that. For example, the apples were all red, shiny, even, and smooth as in the picture. Or here are cucumbers. Alex's grandfather took out a cucumber from the loot box next to him and showed it to us. Cucumbers should be long, straight, and firm, but this one, he grew crooked. It's not bad, it's not wilted, it's not spoiled, it just looks unattractive against the other cucumbers, and no one will pick it from the window, no one will buy it. But they will notice it against the background of others, and then they will say that the store sells crooked and ugly cucumbers and apples with spots. That's how it is. Grandpa took an apple out of the box. It was ripe, juicy, shiny, neither beaten nor rotten, but with a dark growth on the side. We already knew that such growth sometimes appears on these fruits as they ripen, and it's quite normal, but they ruin the view, don't they? Well, there you go. Our adult friend continued about such fruits and vegetables. They say that they do not have a marketable appearance and no one will buy them, but their presence in the window spoils the customer's impression of the store, so they are taken away and thrown away. You can't keep them. It happens with many products. The packaging was crumpled during transportation, the label was torn off, a packet of cereals, for example, was torn. It would be better to pour the cereal into a bag and sell it by weight, right? But you can't do that. Trade rules don't allow it, and they throw it away too. And your yogurts and chocolates are not marketable. There is another point. The customer should have the impression that the store always has everything in abundance. Imagine a person comes to the supermarket 10 minutes before closing time, and they're in the showcase with milk from 6 varieties. Of 3, 2 are out of 3, 2 of them have a couple of packets, and one of them has only 1 packet, and the rest of the showcase is empty. What will a man think? He's lucky, I told him, the last one got the last bag. That's 1 out of 10 people will think so. Alex's grandfather objected, and the rest will think the store is bad. It's not worth going there in the evening because there is a great risk of not finding the right product, and they will go to some other supermarket for food. First in the evenings, and then in general, people quickly get used to everything. That is why the store buys goods with a reserve so that until the closing time, the showcases were full, and what they didn't sell out, they throw away later. Compared to the revenue that regular customers bring them, it's not an expense for them. It was strange to hear all this. I found it hard to believe that you could voluntarily throw away products that you paid for, and provided that my brother and I were brought up by my mother in the strictest economy, and throwing away food or bringing it to a spoiled state in our house was not accepted. In short, such an attitude to food, and even more expensive, I could not understand in my head. But Grandfather At's explanations made the situation a little clearer. It was interesting to talk to him. He seemed to know everything and could explain it in simple words. Often Jay and I would stay in his basement until the evening. It was quiet and cozy and interesting and exciting with him, and we had our own secret hideaway for the winter, also a valuable thing for boys. Grandpa Alex was always happy to see us. He greeted us as welcome guests, was cheerful, good-natured. We saw him angry only a few times when local alcoholics tried to ask for a drink in his basement. Apparently, they too lacked a warm shelter for the winter, but our friend did not let them even on the threshold and even scolded them so that they were taken aback and retreated as soon as possible. By the way, Grandfather himself never drank, not even beer, though we knew it had been stale more than once, not to mention stronger drinks, and he always spoke of local drunkards with contempt. He didn't consider them human beings, probably one of the neighborhood's drank. Eventually, he got angry with Grandpa Alex. He was jealous of his warm place. One afternoon at the end of winter, on a frosty February day, Jay and I went to our friend's house after school as usual and found him under the porch at the entrance to the basement. The basement door was boarded up. On the dumpster nearby were pallets from which Alex's grandfather had assembled his simple furniture and some of his other belongings. The old man himself was lying on the snow in a semi-conscious state. He was shivering. Jay and I leaned over Grandpa and started to shake him. "Friends," he mumbled, finally coming to his senses, "and I've got a disaster. My apartment was ruined. I slept outside." "He's hot as a stove," Jay exclaimed. "He must be sick. I bet he is. Let's get him home with us, home." Jay hesitated. "Would Mom let us?" "We can't just leave him here. He'll freeze to death." We got the old man up. He was semi-conscious and very weak, but we managed to convince him. "We have to go just a little way, and it will be warm, and everything will be all right." We dragged him home, took him to our room, and put him on my bed. We took off his boots and jacket, found a thermometer in the hallway, measured his temperature, and got scared. The old man relaxed a little in the warmth, but he was thrashing around the bed and moaning. We rushed for the first aid kit. "What does Mom use to bring down our fever?" "Paracetamol, but there's no such thing here." "Oh, I remember, aspirin. She gives us 3 pills, aspirin, Analgen, and paracetamol. There's nothing like that here." "Then go to the pharmacy," I told my little brother. We scraped some change out of our pockets and took a handful of coins. Thanks to Grandpa Alex's treats, we were spending a lot less pocket money, so it was a pretty big handful, but we didn't know if it would be enough for the medicine. "Watch this." I quickly began to write the names of the pills on a piece of paper in scrolled letters. "You buy paracetamol first of all, it brings down the temperature. Then aspirin, it also helps with fever and kills infections. And Analgen is the last thing you buy, it just makes you feel better. But if the fever goes down, Grandpa will feel better anyway. We can probably do without that pill." "I guess you got it." "Got it. my brother reported and ran out of the house. I, on second thought, started pulling the old man's clothes off. It wasn't easy. Alex's grandfather was wrapped up, and he didn't help me in any way. I tried to move him from side to side to remove a sweater, a turtleneck, a warm shirt, and 3 pairs of pants. There was a natural struggle for each item. "Leave me alone, Gusta," grumbled Grandpa. "Grandpa Alex," I explained, "you need to be rubbed with cold water to bring down the fever, and for that, you have to undress. You can't use cold water if you're chilly." I heard my mom's voice from behind me. "You need warm water, but not above body temperature." "Did you take my temperature?" I handed my mother a thermometer. She took one look and shook her head. "It's high, and as it happens, we're out of paracetamol." "I'll go to Aunt Lita or what?" Lita, our neighbor, worked as a paramedic in the ambulance and has repeatedly helped all the residents of the entrance in emergency situations. But now I had time to tell her that Jay had gone to the pharmacy. I wrote him a list of what pills he needs. "All right then," Mom nodded. "Let's undress our guest finally, and I'll get some water." Jay came running with the medicine. There was enough for everything. The 2 of us stripped Alex's grandfather of his clothes, leaving him in his underwear, and gave him the pills. Mom brought a basin of warm water, 2 large sponges from the household supplies, and a clean towel. She placed the towel on the old man's forehead, having previously soaked it in water, and gave us the sponges with the basin moistened a little at a time, but so that the skin was damp, not wet. Half an hour later, we took our patient's temperature again. To our joy, the thermometer showed much less. It was a victory. Mom gave Grandpa some raspberry morsels, asked how he was feeling, then wrapped him in a blanket and told him to rest. She took Jay and me into the kitchen and started asking questions. For all the previous troubles, we had not even had time to agree on what we would tell and what was better to keep silent, so I, as the eldest, decided to take the fall. I told half-truths. Alex's grandfather lived in the basement nearby. We met him by chance and became friends. He's nice. Yesterday the basement was boarded up, and he had to sleep outside and caught a cold. We couldn't leave him there, you know, Mom, I said. He'd have died under the porch. You saw the condition he was in. I know, Mom nodded. You say he spent the night in the snow? Yes, it seems, I continued. Without Aunt Lita, we cannot do. She called the neighbor. Fortunately, she was home. Aunt Lita examined Grandpa, asked him how he was feeling, took his temperature again. Then she rejoiced us. No frostbite. Internal organs, it seems, were not affected by the cold. But it'd be a good idea to get it checked out. Then she told us how to take care of Grandpa, how to bring down the fever, and what to do in critical situations. After explaining everything, she took Mom into the kitchen and shut the door. Jay and I naturally stuck our ears to the door. Julia and I do not understand, asked Aunt Lita. Where did you get a bum in your apartment? Boys brought, pronounced Mom, a little confused. I came, and Robert was looking after him. He said it was a friend of theirs. What was I supposed to do? Imagine that you come home, and you have a stranger in the nursery with a deep cut, for example, and he's bleeding, and your son is trying to bandage him up. What do you do? Of course, you'll stop the bleeding first, and then you'll deal with it. You'll say the same thing with a laceration, smirked Aunt Lita. Well, almost, Mom answered. You saw it yourself. He's not on his feet, barely conscious. How they dragged him away, I can't imagine. But if they dragged him and brought him into the house without asking and began to treat him, it means that this old man is really important to them in some way. Actually, he's not a bad cockroach, the neighbor said thoughtfully. I've seen him often. He lives in the basement near the new supermarket. Near the supermarket, you say? Mom's tone became noticeably more interested, even wary. Yes, Aunt Leah agreed. He collects expired food, eats there, but mostly sits on the basement porch, talking to passers-by. In general, with everyone who agrees to support the conversation. Once he helped me carry my bags to the entrance. I wanted to give him some money in gratitude, so did not take insult. It says, for any man, it is normal to help a woman in a difficult situation, but it's shameful to take money for it. You know, his speech is quite good, literate. You can sense that he's educated. He used to be intelligent, and I've never seen him drunk, not like the rest of the neighborhood. Your boys might be interested in him, but you should send him to the hospital. I don't know what kind of disease he's got on him besides a cold. He's in a bad way, to be honest. Who would take him to the hospital? Mom was surprised. He has no documents, not even a passport. The ambulance will take him, Aunt Lita said confidently. We take everyone. We take everyone. And then where to? Back to the cold, Mom's voice sounded doubtful. What do you care? Jay and I couldn't take it anymore and burst into the kitchen. Mom! Don't put Grandpa Alex in the hospital. We'll take care of him ourselves, shouted Jay. Let him stay with us, please. I supported my brother. He's really our friend, and friends should be helped. He's good and he doesn't drink, careful and smart. You'll like him. He's almost like a grandfather to us. Let us have a grandfather for a little while, please. Do you need a grandfather? Perplexed, Mom asked, clearly confused by our insistence. I do, I said firmly. I remember how Grandpa Nicola communicated. It was great with him. It's cool to have a grandfather, and Grandpa Alex is even better than Grandpa Nicola. Mom shifted her gaze to Jay. He raised an eyebrow, saying, I don't remember Grandpa Nicola, but I think it's great to have a grandfather, especially one like Grandpa Alex, my brother said. Mom sank down in her chair. Inside, she had a look of confusion and panic on her face. Now, from the height of my years, I understand her. You live for your children, trying to make sure they have everything they need, both materially and psychologically, and suddenly the children say that for a long time, they have been deprived of something that you are unable to give them, no matter how hard you try, that they need contact with a man, with the older generation. They need trusting communication not only with their mom, but with someone older, wiser, more reliable. You, despite your best efforts, deprived them of an important part of their childhood, which they desperately needed because of your stupid principles. You did, by the way. How do I look them in the eye now? But I understand that now. Back then, neither Jay nor I had any idea of the blow we were inflicting on our mother with our words. We were just sincerely expressing our request and hoping, as always, that Mom would understand and support us. Mom sighed. Anyway, as long as your friend is sick, you can't let him go anywhere, she said. So he will stay with us, and then we'll see. Lita, will you come to us tomorrow to check the condition of our guest? The neighbor nodded. After her departure, Mom asked, so, from the store dump, you still have not left, not deaf, Mom? We didn't go there anymore, Jay replied. You told us not to. We were all yelling at each other. We just went to look. We passed by, and there was Uncle Alex sitting there. That's how we met him, and then we'd just go and visit him. And he'd go through the bins for you and get you expiration dates. No, how do you hide things from your mom? We looked down, we shut up. Don't go there again, Mom said sternly. Don't put yourself at risk, and don't ruin your reputation. If I find out that you again started digging in the bins in the yard, I will throw your friend out of the house, and I will not regret it. Is that clear? That was a serious threat. For the sake of Uncle Alex to stay with us, we agreed to any deprivation, even to refuse free goodies. Moreover, while the old man was ill, we had to take care of him all the time, so there was no time to visit the back of the supermarket. Our named grandfather's fever didn't go down for about a week. If it wasn't for Aunt Lita's help, we wouldn't have been able to cope with this scourge. But even after the disease receded, the old man was still very weak. He slept a lot, ate, moved around the apartment a little with difficulty, but he steadily reached the toilet by himself. And when he felt a little better, he asked my mother for permission to wash. I'm lying there, covered in sweat and stinking of disease. I'm disgusted with myself, he explained. Don't be afraid, daughter. I'll manage, Mom answered, giving him a towel and an old terrycloth robe. Don't lock the door. If you make any noise, the boys will come running to you. Grandpa Alex managed by himself, and from that day on, no matter how he felt, he took a shower every day. He was thankful for the robe, but he preferred to dress in his tights and t-shirt immediately after washing. Mom had laundered them and tidied them up, so it made for a pretty passable home outfit. No matter what kind of trouble you're in, no matter what condition you're in, the main thing is to keep your dignity and keep yourself in order, he repeated to us, looking at the efforts of the named grandfather. And my brother and I began to be more and more careful and picky about our appearance, hairstyle, clean hands, and nails. We even started ironing our own shirts for school, although before there was nothing to stop us from running to lessons. Mom watched us and smiled quietly. Our efforts seemed to have improved her attitude toward Grandpa Alex. We really wished Mom would love him as much as we did and let him stay with us forever. We were waiting for the old man's recovery, and at the same time, we were afraid of this event. It is clear that as soon as Grandfather is fully back to normal, we will have to decide what to do with him next. And what if Mom's decision does not coincide with ours? We didn't even think about the fact that Alex's grandfather wouldn't want to stay with us. How could he not after all? At our place is clearly better than in the basement or on the street. However, a little more than a month passed, and our strengthened after a cold, our guest in the evening at dinner began to talk about further plans himself. Julia, daughter, he said, addressing her mother, thank you for your shelter, for your care. For sheltering me, and to you, friends, thank you for not leaving me to die in the cold. Without you, I'd be lost. But my conscience won't allow me to use your hospitality any longer. It's time for me to leave. Where will you go, Grandpa Alex? I resented. Your cellar is boarded up. Where will you live? Well, I guess the basement is not the last one in town, the old man grinned. I'll get a place somewhere. Why don't you want to stay with us? Jay asked in a shaky voice. Are you unhappy with us? What's the matter, Jay? Grandpa said affectionately. I'm very happy with you. I wish I had a family like you and grandchildren like you. I've grown attached to you. I won't lie. But I'm a grown man myself. I'm ashamed to sit on your mom's neck. I'm just an expense, a hassle, no profit, no benefit. And you're on a tight budget as it is. Well, I would argue about the benefits, Mom smiled. You watch the boys, you've taught them a lot. You think I don't notice, and they're just having fun with you, and I feel better that my children are under supervision while I'm at work. I wish they'd stay till summer so they could go out and get warm. Otherwise, you'll be outside for a week, and then, God forbid, you'll get sick again. All our work will be for nothing. Thank you, my daughter, the old man smiled, but really, I'm embarrassed. And we would have restored your documents and pension, Mom continued. It can all be done if you do it. We'll write an application for a lost passport. You will be issued a new one, and with it, you can go to the pension fund. By age, you already have a pension. You'll have your own personal income, you'll get an allowance, and if you want, you'll pay me back the money for your stay. Mom smiled. If not, I won't be offended, really, Uncle Alex. I was happy you must have a pension. My mom knows, she's a social worker by training. Jay nodded in affirmation. What? You, Julia, graduated from an institute, didn't you? Grandpa was surprised. Why are you wasting your health in the warehouse? I've already got allergies, so to asthma is not far away. Why don't you look for a job in your specialty or something more prestigious? The warehouse has a shift schedule, convenient, Mom shrugged. I got a job there when the boys were little so that they wouldn't be left alone for too long, and it was always easier to deal with illnesses. You can substitute, and instead of going on sick leave, you lose less in salary. But the boys are already big, Alex's grandfather objected. You can find another place. Yes, Mom was clearly embarrassed. It's a bit heavy, of course, and it's not good for your health, But you know, Grandpa Alex, I'm scared, aren't I? I already know everything there. I know how to do everything. But when you come to a new place, you'll have to learn everything all over again. What if I can't do it? What if I've forgotten everything I've been taught? What if I don't fit in, and everyone needs young people now, and I'm already old, 35 years old? Alex was seriously indignant. Don't tell me about your age, Mom said in a stern tone. That's not what we were talking about. Don't get off the subject. I ask you to stay with us until spring and try to restore your documents and pension during this time. I'll help you in any way I can, at least with the same fees, and I'll go to the authorities with you when it gets warmer outside. And we finish restoring your papers and pension, you can choose to go anywhere or stay with us already having a permanent income from the state. How do you see it, Grandpa Alex? Grandpa Alex is silent, and his look, as it seemed to me, was thoughtful. Let's at least try, Mom insisted. Pensions and passport, in any case, will not be superfluous, and you only need to specify your name and surname, date of birth, the address where you were last registered, somewhere you lived before you found yourself on the street, and then the police will sort it out for you. Oh, my daughter, if only I knew all that, Grandpa Alex exclaimed sorrowfully. Name, address, I might not have ended up at your place. How's that? Jay was surprised. Have you been wandering for so long that you've forgotten everything about yourself? Our guest sighed, lowered his eyes, spread the tablecloth on the table with the palm of his hand. Then he raised his head and began his story. It's a little backwards, Jay. I ended up on the street after I'd forgotten all about myself. How it happened, I don't know. It was summer, it was hot. I woke up in the Central Park. I'm sitting on a bench by the pond in the sun. I had a newspaper open on my lap. I dozed off from the heat. It's probably rosemary, my head is cloudy and a little dizzy. I got up from the bench, went to the pond, washed my face from there, sat in the shade. I think my head has released a little. I think I should go home, and then I realized that I don't know where to go. It's like a blank spot in my mind, you know? I was so scared, I can't tell you. But at first, I thought I was just overheating, like I got some kind of sunstroke or something. I sat in the cool under the trees for a while. Meanwhile, I dug around in my head and realized how much I'd accumulated, the whole school curriculum, plots of some books, movies, and all. I realized about myself was that my name was Alex. Everything else seemed to be walled off. I looked at the newspaper that I had with me, it was open in the middle. I must have dozed off reading it. Not a single familiar article. It was like I was seeing it for the first time. Even the front page doesn't tell me anything. I went through my pockets, I thought I might find some documents or a cell phone. Nothing at all, no money, not a dime, not a piece of paper, just a bunch of keys. But I wish I knew where they came from. I don't remember. It was already evening when I thought that a man can't go far away from home with only keys, no money, no phone. I decided that I probably lived somewhere near the park and that I had just come out here to read a newspaper in a cultural place. Of course, there was still the possibility that I had some kind of bag or purse with me, and they could have stolen it while I was sleeping on the bench, but I decided not to consider it for now. I got up and walked away from the park through the neighborhood yards. I reasoned that I should live nearby, and I hoped that I would recognize my yard or some of my neighbors would recognize me, say hello there, call me, and then I'd figure it out. But as luck would have it, none of the houses looked familiar to me, not even a little, and my hopes for neighbors were not justified. Evening had come, the yards were empty, no kids, no pensioners on benches, no young moms. Once in a while, I bumped into people, but they paid no attention to me. I settled down for the night on a bench near one of the entrances. In the morning, the janitor woke me up. She didn't recognize me, but at least she turned on the water in the street tap so that I could drink and wash up. What else can I tell you? Grandpa Alex spread his hands. I wandered around the neighborhood for a week, maybe. I couldn't remember anyone else, and no one recognized me. But during that time, I had already learned to choose places to rest, places to hide for the night. I knew where to wash up and even noticed a rivulet at the back of the park where I could bathe and wash my clothes. I was hungry, but I didn't want to beg. I made a deal with a salesman at a pie stand, and she would give me the baked goods she had written off at the end of the day. In general, I settled down somehow and decided that if this was the way fate turned out, then so be it. I spent the summer on the streets of the city. I went to different neighborhoods, met many people, learned that there are a lot of street dwellers. In fact, I looked at how they live. I collected my closet from garbage cans. Sometimes I earned a little money. I collected recyclables, bottles, boxes, film, and handed them over to a point near the market. They didn't require a passport and didn't pay much, but it was enough for my needs. I managed to scrape together enough for a bar of soap or a toothbrush. Of course, I could scrap metal, but they wouldn't take it without documents, and the men who offered me to turn in metal as a couple their passport and my booty were usually so drunk and unpleasant that I didn't want to deal with them. I generally tried not to make free with alcoholics, they're people without dignity. But that's how the summer went, and in the fall, it got colder. I huddled at the station, slept in the waiting room. Of course, I was chased out of there, but not often, and I tried to take care of myself so they rarely took me for a bum. More often I looked like an ordinary pensioner, poor but clean, not dirty, not smelly. They didn't pay much attention to me. I could always get warm or even come in at night. I spent my nights at the station, and during the day, I walked around your neighborhood, checking myself out. That's how I found this little basement. It's almost paradise. There's water, heat, and next to the store where they regularly throw away discarded products, so you can spend the winter and not starve to death. And then, you know the rest. For a while, we were silent, just stunned, looking at our guest. Then my mother asked my grandfather cautiously, "Alex, why didn't you go to the police or hospital right away? They would have helped you with amnesia and with finding the house. What if you have family, relatives who are looking for you? They're going crazy worrying about you. Or the dog is home alone." Jay supported his mom. "No one will even feed her." He looked at Grandpa reproachfully. The old man sighed, shook his lips, sipped a sip of tea, gathering his thoughts. "It's hard to explain," he said at last. "You see, I was scared. I told you, I know and remember a lot of things. I know that the human psyche is organized in a special way. It always tries to keep itself in balance. You may have heard that people who have experienced some traumatizing event, something terrible, unpleasant, fall into a state of shock, and then quickly forget the event. The human memory itself pushes these memories to the margins so that its owner did not suffer unnecessary nervousness, could continue to live. This happens especially often with children, but it also happens with adults. I'm talking about something really scary, hard for a person, not when you were insulted on the bus or scolded by your boss, but when, for example, you were severely beaten or cruelly betrayed, or you were in a serious accident. A person can remember the fact itself, but the details and emotions on this occasion memory diligently erases. Yes, we were told such things in the course of psychology, noted Mom. Here we go. Alex's grandfather seemed to be glad of the support. I thought maybe it's not for nothing that I don't remember anything. Maybe something happened to me that I couldn't bear, couldn't digest in myself, and stay in my mind, and so my psyche decided to hide these memories from me. What if my beloved wife, without whom I could not imagine life, died or was kicked out of the house by my own children? Or did I learn something bad about those children? But you know, it's not worth remembering. Later, I also thought, what if I had done something terrible myself, killed someone, or brought someone to the grave, or something like that? Maybe I didn't do it now, but when I was younger, who knows? But my head got tired of remembering it and erased all the information. It's not for nothing that I can't even remember my past, not even my childhood. So I became afraid of memories and decided to live without them, as it turned out. Aren't you overreacting? Mom asked doubtfully. I don't know, my daughter, the old man shook his head. Anyway, I never hid from anyone, always socialized with everyone around me. The police stopped me several times. I talked to the police, especially when I was picking up trash or recyclables. If I had, as you say, some relatives looking for me, they could have found me. Or there'd be an APB out on me, or there'd be posters up. I left home and never came back. I have seen such flyers, by the way. I always looked at them, but I never found myself in them, so I don't think anyone needs me in this town. He's done, we, Jay and I, exclaimed indignantly, almost in unison. The old man smiled, patted me on the top of my head, and winked. Mom was silent, fiddling with her teaspoon. Then she looked at Grandpa Alex and gave him a stern look. Good, she said. I understand. Since you've decided so for yourself, I won't keep you, and I won't drag you to psychiatrists to deal with your amnesia. But please stay with us for 2 more days. Tomorrow is Lita's day off. I want her to examine you and confirm that your cold is completely gone. I want to be sure that you have accumulated enough strength and will not get sick again barely being outside. You must admit, that would be a shame. The boys and I have worked so hard on you. If Lita says you're all right by now, you can consider yourself free tonight. She's on shift tomorrow. Afternoon, she'll sleep in, and I'll invite her over tonight. All right? It was a concession Grandpa Alex agreed to. That afternoon, Jay and I skipped school. I wasn't in the mood to go to class. We walked to a large shopping center, sat down in its food court at one of the empty tables, and spent the afternoon discussing how we could convince the old man to stay with us, not to go back to the street. But alas, we couldn't come up with any worthwhile plans. Upset, we returned home and were quiet and depressed all evening. Boys, I'm sad myself, said Mom, noticing our condition. But understand, Grandpa Alex is not a kitten or a puppy that you can bring from the street and keep. He is an adult, he has free will, freedom of choice. He has the right to decide for himself how to live and where to live, and we can't force him to stay if he decides otherwise. Why don't we agree that we'll see him once in a while or ask him to let us know about him once in a while? Why don't we give him my old cell phone, I suggested, and we'll call him so we know where he is and what's wrong with him. How about that? That's a good idea, Mom nodded. I'll have to offer him tomorrow, only somehow carefully so that he would not refuse out of pride. But we did not have time to offer the phone or even to give our guest a medical examination. The next day, the event that turned the whole story upside down took place. It was Saturday, Jay and I's legal day off. There were no classes at school that day, and usually we slept through the afternoon. But today we woke up at 9 o'clock in the morning. We wanted to be with Grandpa Alex longer before he left. Alas, the old man didn't change his mind overnight, and my brother and I had hoped he would. Immediately after breakfast, Grandpa began to prepare for his departure. He went through his entire closet, he sent some to the laundry, some to be mended. Of course, all his clothes had already been washed many times, and his mom even took his old down jacket to the dry cleaner secretly from our guest. But when else will he be able to brush his teeth again? In addition, the sweater needed to pick up the buttonholes, on the pants to sew a button, somewhere to patch small holes. That's what Uncle Alex did, rejecting Mom's offer of help. You shouldn't be messing around with an old man, daughter, he said angrily. And I'm not infirm. I'll go myself. We clung to the old man, clung to his arms, tried to sit next to him. In the end, he turned away from us too. There's nothing to hang around, angrily said the grandfather. It would be better to do some work too. Robert's got a button torn off his shirt cuff and an ink stain on his sleeve, and Jay's got a seam split on his sports jersey. It's a little more than that, and there's going to be a hole. You're going to have to fix that up. That's right, Mom cut in. Grown-up guys, and you don't know how to take care of your clothes. Until when am I going to mess with your holes and buttons? Until the wedding? Soon, we were sitting around Grandpa Alex with our pants and shirts, armed with needles and thread. The old man looked at our work, sometimes corrected something, gave advice, made remarks. But then, after he had examined Jay's pants, he praised them so much that his brother glowed with pride, with the most satisfied look. Brother went to the closet to hide his sports uniform, but on the way, he stopped at the window. "Window, look at this car," he exclaimed excitedly. I jumped up to him. The two of us hung on the windowsill with our noses in the glass and stared at the street. And there was a lot to see. A huge shiny black Jeep with tinted windows, like an ocean liner, was parked outside our driveway. We've never seen one of these in our neighborhood, but we had recently read a review of this model on a website. We didn't even know they existed in our city. "Let's go outside and take a closer look," Jay suggested. At that moment, the doors of the Jeep opened, and three men got out, one large and very solid, in a black overcoat and wearing a strict suit, and two not so solid but much larger, resembling security guards from Hollywood movies. The first man moved toward the entrance, and the other two followed him, keeping a respectful distance and, as if inadvertently, looking around the yard. "Yeah, they'll let you get closer," I grinned, watching the small procession disappear into the house. The driver's still there, and maybe another guard too. I wondered who they were visiting. Jay was paid with curiosity. It was as if some big businessman or hitman lived in our entryway. The doorbell rang, interrupting his speech. "Our door, really?" We rushed into the hallway, forgetting everything. Jay picked the lock. The old trio stood on the doorstep. "Hello," I was confused. My brother backed away, hiding behind me. "Hello," said a respectable man, his attendants towering behind him like two small bulletproof cabinets. The man slipped his hand into the breast pocket of his coat, and I shuddered. What would he pull out of there? A gun? But all that emerged from the pocket was a photograph. The man showed it to Jay and me and asked, "Does this man live here?" Grandpa Alex was smiling from the picture. We looked at each other and nodded in confusion. "Take me to him, please," the guest asked politely, and without waiting for our consent, stepped into the hallway. We led the visitor into our room. He stopped on the threshold and, seeing the old man busy mending his sweater, sighed loudly. Grandpa Alex raised his head from his work, looked at the visitor, and shook his head sadly. "So, you found me," he sighed. "Why so bad timing? Is something wrong with you?" The stranger clucked. "Be thankful you found me at all. You didn't have to look. Come on, let's go. No more walking around." "What if I don't want to go with you?" Uncle Alex asked. "Well, there's someone to talk you into it," the man shrugged indifferently. "The boys are on the playground. Shall I call them? What's going on here?" From behind our backs came the stern voice of my mother. The stranger turned to her and examined her carefully from head to toe. "Hello," he said politely. "I am Mr. Leroy, the mayor of this town." After saying that, he bowed slightly. Mom shrugged. "I didn't ask who you were." "Thank God, I'm still saying. Watching TV, reading the news, I know what uptown looks like. I asked you, what's going on here? What are you doing in my apartment and what right do you have to threaten my guest? Care to explain?" "Your guest is my father," the man explained reluctantly. "He disappeared from home over the summer, and only now I've managed to find him. I want to take him home. All the expenses you have incurred for his upkeep, I am reimbursed. Get ready," he threw to his grandfather. The old man did not move. His face became angry, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyebrows drew together at the bridge of his nose. He tried to say something but didn't have time. Mom came into the room and covered him with herself. "Living expenses," she interjected contemptuously. "You talk as if you were talking about a dog, not your own father. You've been looking for him since the summer. Doesn't our mayor have the resources and connections to find a missing person quickly? If I were you, I'd put the whole city on alert. It would take me 3 days to find my missing father. You'd better prove you're telling the truth or explain what you need this man for. He doesn't look too happy to see you here himself. He doesn't want to go anywhere with you. Why should I explain myself to you? Leroy asked glumly and contemptuously. For your own good, Mom answered calmly. If you try to take Grandpa away by force, I'll make such a scandal that all the neighbors will be here in a minute. And your gorillas on the stairs won't help you. But tomorrow the whole city will know that our esteemed mayor attacked a single mother in her own apartment, morally traumatized her children, and tried to kidnap an infirm pensioner. Do you need such a stain on your reputation? Leroy frowned and pouted. But then, from behind his mother's back, suddenly came a dry cough and laughter. Grandpa Alex was laughing. Oh, Leroy, she's hitting you where it hurts, on your reputation, he laughed. What will you do now, my dear? You've got nothing left to do but flap your eyes. Laughing, the old man took my mother's hand and said a little embarrassed, Julia, daughter, here's the thing. This is really my son. Yes, and we all really need to explain ourselves. Grandpa Alex, do you remember him? Remember him? Jay and I screamed. The old man lowered his eyes, sighed guiltily. Then he raised his head and looked at us straight on. The thing is, I didn't forget him, he said. You'll have to forgive me, my friends, Julia, for lying to you about the amnesia. But I had no choice. Otherwise, Julia would have started searching for my relatives, restoring documents, and everything else. And I couldn't tell you who my family was, no matter how I feel about my son. I don't want to ruin his life. Leroy looked at all of us for a moment and then disappeared into the hallway. From the sounds of it, he let his guards go downstairs. The mayor himself returned to the room without his coat, sat down on a chair, and said, I agree. We need to explain ourselves. And from the looks of it, the conversation will take some time. Please, first of all, so that I understand the situation, tell me how long my father has been living with you and how he came to be with you in the first place. And what's the story with the amnesia, by the way, Grandpa Alex? Are you going to tell me? No, the old man shook his head. Will you tell it first, as it is, as it was, in your opinion? First, I told him how we met the old man in the back of the supermarket, how we started visiting him in his basement, and how we found him near the basement in a feverish delirium and brought him home. I kept silent about the expired chocolates and cookies that Grandpa Alex got us from the trash cans. I was embarrassed to talk about it to such a respectable adult uncle, but not because I was worried about his opinion of me. I didn't want him to think badly of our mom. I didn't want him to think she couldn't treat us to her own goodies. Maybe he understood something from my story, but he didn't show it. Then my mom spoke. She told us what condition the old man was in when he came to our apartment, how we treated him and brought him back to normal, about how he had made friends with us and with her, how we had become attached to him, how much he had taught us during that short period of time, and about yesterday's conversation. My mother told us, too, not concealing either Grandfather Alex's desire to leave us or his story about amnesia. Grandpa himself sat silent the whole time, not interrupting or adding to our collective narrative. When we finished, Leroy turned to the old man and asked, "Who's next?" "Me? Me? All right, okay," he said, turning back to us and shifting his gaze to Mom. "Julia, right? Julia, you recognized me, and you yourself admitted that you are interested in the news, watch TV, and generally live in this city, so you know I'm a second-term mayor, right? Do you know what I have managed to do during this time? And you're familiar with my main line of work, but I'll give you a quick reminder. All the time I have been in politics, I have been promoting and implementing various initiatives aimed at protecting and supporting pensioners and senior citizens. It is thanks to my work, for example, that we have free public transportation for all old people at the expense of the city budget. As well as in many commercial clinics, the elderly can receive free basic services. The city then reimburses this to the medical institutions. I encourage enterprises and companies that hire aged employees, and not for low-skilled labor, such as janitors or cleaners, but for specialist positions and many other things. I went into politics for this very reason, to ensure a normal life for our old people. I was taught from childhood to respect my elders. My family taught me, my father taught me. I seriously believe that there is something to respect them for, and that our pensioners can teach the younger generation a lot, teach them professionally and, most importantly, morally. After all, they have undergone such hardening, gained so much wisdom during their lives, accumulated such a huge psychological experience. They should not be scrapped. We should try to give our old people an opportunity to share their wisdom with young people. And for this, first of all, it is necessary to provide them with a normal life, to cover their basic needs. This is what I have been working on since the beginning of my career and continue to work on now. However, I am not one of those people who, in pursuit of the happiness of all mankind, forget about a particular person. Of course, I have tried my best to make life comfortable and convenient for those pensioners who are part of my family. In particular, I am talking about my father. I have a 2-story house in the suburbs. I bought it before I entered politics with business income. My wife and I and my wife's parents lived there. My father also lived there. There was a whole wing on the 2nd floor for him. You see, not a room, not a corner, but a full wing of the house with a bedroom, a bathroom, a study, and a library, a dressing room, and even a living room in case he wanted to invite some of his old friends over. All of this was, of course, looked after by a maid. We have a cook who does the cooking for each day. You can order a dish that you want or just choose from the refrigerator what you like. That is, Dad did not have to deal with everyday life around the house. It's a beautiful garden, spacious, there is a place for walking. We keep dogs, it's not boring with them. Several bus routes pass through our village, but a car with a chauffeur is always on duty at the house, especially for parents. At any time, you can go to the city for business or entertainment or to the doctor, for example. Of course, all this was and still is provided by me. Father receives a pension on a card, but I, of course, do not ask him to pay part of the utilities or invest in the purchase of groceries. I don't know if he spends his money at all or what he spends it on. It hasn't occurred to me to inquire about it. I think it's normal. He supported me when I was a kid, and now it's my turn. As you can see, my father has all the conditions for a decent old age, and yet he ran away from home this summer. Your indignation, Julia, at how long it took us to find him is justified, but only in part. For one thing, it took us a while to realize he was missing. You've thought this through. Leroy threw Alex a sneer, just like an old scout. The old man grinned at the words, stretched out in a straight line, and saluted his son. Grinned back. Apparently, it was some kind of joke understood only by the two of them. The man continued the story. This summer, my wife and I went on vacation abroad. We were away from home for 2 weeks. According to my mother-in-law and father-in-law, a day after our departure, my father started talking about the fact that he also wanted to take a vacation to visit an old friend allegedly living in some village in the state. He talked about it several times and then suddenly disappeared from the house. The father-in-law called him, but the phone was out of range, so the folks at home assumed that the father had gone to his buddy's house, and the village he went to is so remote that there is no cell service. They told me about it when we got back from vacation. Of course, I tried calling my dad too. I called daily at different times several days in a row, but to no avail. One day, I dialed in front of the maid and then lamented to my wife about my father's unavailability. That's when the maid told me that my father's phone was lying on the table in his study. Switched off, yes, despite the absence of the owner of the rooms, they were regularly cleaned. I got worried, went up to my father's wing, inspected his rooms. It turned out that he was gone, leaving behind not only his phone, bank cards, documents, travel pass, all his clothes, and travel bags. It was all there. I didn't know what to think. An elderly man had left home, apparently for a short time, and disappeared. What could have happened to him? Anything. And the trouble was, he'd probably been gone about 2 weeks. That's a lot of time wasted. I've called every hospital and morgue, that goes without saying. And then, you know, Julia, the mayor was still only addressing my mom, ignoring us, me positioning myself as someone who's trying to take care of the older generation. I'm going to run for governor in the near future and push my line at the next level, and at such a moment, I simply cannot admit to the public that my elderly father has disappeared, and I have not even noticed it. I'd be eaten up by the competition. Journalists are hyping this story to an unbelievable scale. I can already picture the headlines. A famous politician poisoned his own father, forcing him to run away from home. What was life really like for our mayor's father? The caring son didn't notice his father's 2-week absence, and so on. It would have been the end of my career, you know. I couldn't let that happen, so I didn't go to the police. My security guys did the search. Alas, I did not immediately realize that their qualifications, let's say, are not very suitable for this kind of work. They are more for security, but for some reason, I believed in them. I berated myself for it later. Terrible how much time wasted. Dad could have just died somewhere. Later, I hired a private investigator. Unfortunately, it was already the beginning of winter, but with him, things picked up. He managed, though not immediately, to find the people who saw Dad at the train station in the fall. Then this guy combed all the brothel and heating ducts near the station, interviewed everyone he could, expanding circles in the neighborhood. In the end, he found the loaders of the supermarket, which is not far from you, who remembered the old man's conversation and showed the basement where he lived. Then the men remembered the teenagers, they remembered you boys, and then it was a matter of technique. Yeah, we delayed the search, but only because we couldn't go public. Believe me, it was a lot of heartache and heartbreak. I realized it would have been better to go to the authorities, it would have been faster. After all, even such a simple operation as checking the tickets sold at the station ticket office would have taken the police a couple of days and us several weeks. Yes, we were taking risks, including my father's life, but I couldn't put my reputation, my business on the line. I'd already had a lot of house guests. Asked me about my father. Yes, I was regularly visited by fellow party members, former business partners, people interested in cooperating with me personally, and the city hall in general. Sometimes just for dinner, sometimes we had dinner parties, and many of the guests knew my father and respected him very much. I always invited him to meet interesting people, and they, by the way, also found him a very worthy conversationalist. And these people asked me, "Where is Mr. Alexander?" And I don't know what to say. "Oh, you could say I'm dead." "That's all that matters," Uncle Alex grumbled angrily. "If only you knew for sure," his son replied annoyed. "But today you are buried in words, and tomorrow you refuse. And what, arrange a solemn resurrection? Or hide you for the rest of your life? Or say that I was joking about the death and thereby brand myself as an idiot?" Jay and I looked at each other and laughed irreverently. Leroy's last lines had shattered his previous monologue about how he tried to take care of his father and how worried he'd been about finding him. Not that we realized it head-on at that age, we could hardly have articulated the reason for our laughter. We just realized, felt, that Mr. Mayor was lying, and then suddenly he made a big deal out of it. He realized it himself after a few seconds and seemed a little embarrassed, but he didn't shush. Instead, he began to talk about how glad he was that his father was in good health and how he wanted to take the old man home as soon as possible. He went on and on about how grateful he was to my mom and to our family in general. Mom listened and nodded, but from the look on her face, she didn't believe a word the man said. In the end, she just seemed to get tired of the flow of words. "Right, but we've heard two sides," she pronounced, shaking her head. "What about the third, Uncle Alex? Tell us what really happened. Did you really run away from home, or did something bad happen to you, for example, on a walk after which you were ashamed to return? And where were you planning on leaving us, home to your son tomorrow, God forbid, Julia?" Grandpa Alex shook his hands. "That's one place I would never go back to. I was planning to move to a bigger city and continue my street life there, as long as I was healthy enough." "But why?" I wondered. "The streets are cold, hungry, dangerous, and you have a house and money." "Because, Robert, I'm tired of being a stage set," the old man answered incomprehensibly. I owe you my life, and I've already tried to cheat you once. And what of it? So I'll tell you now, but please, I beg you, let's keep this between us. We nodded our heads in agreement. Mr. Leroy frowned. Are you implying that I told you something wrong, that I lied about something? He asked. That you are, Grandpa Alex grinned. In material terms, you described everything very accurately, almost everything. But it's not limited to the material plane, is it? All my life, I've worked in a research institute in wave physics and I got my doctorate. My wife worked there too. We lived in a house for researchers, we were given a good spacious apartment, and the apartment complex itself is still quoted in the city, even though it was built a long time ago. The neighbors were of the appropriate level, scientists, professors, PhDs. So Leroy grew up surrounded by intelligent and smart people, agreed. It's not a bad start in life, but my wife and I also tried to provide our son with a good start in material terms. He graduated from the best university in the state, received an excellent education, and right after graduation, he had a cooperative apartment and a car. Well, even if not new, but quite reliable. Back then, scientists were still valued, they paid for our inventions, and quite well. Leroy got his diploma, moved out soon, married a nice girl, but he only managed to work in his specialty for a couple of years, and then Leroy went into business. He worked his ass off, but he was successful. The third largest grocery store chain in the state, that's what he did. I was very proud of my son, his tenacity, his hard work, his grit, that he was able to navigate a new situation and provide a decent standard of living for himself and his wife. But I learned about his successes either from newspapers or from my daughter-in-law. She was the one who visited my wife and me. She was the one who always picked up the phone if we called and told us the news. My son came once every 2 or 3 months, brought us gifts and money, and all the time excused himself by being busy. Later, my wife died, but even that didn't make Leroy pay more attention to me. On the contrary, his visits were reduced to twice a year at New Year's and on my birthday. Well, of course, it was a shame. Of course, I wanted more contact with my son. After all, we were quite close during his childhood and teenage years. Of course, I was lonely and I wanted grandchildren. But I managed to convince myself that Leroy was a grown man and I should not impose on him. I led the life of an active pensioner, participated in the affairs of the house, made friends with neighbors, often went for walks, visited theaters and exhibitions, read a lot, bought a computer, and on the internet studied the news in my specialty and then discussed them with former colleagues who lived next door. I was in regular contact with my daughter-in-law, sending greetings to my son through her, and she sent greetings from him in return. But I suspect that Leroy had nothing to do with them. It is unlikely that he remembered me at all. The mayor at this point tried to object, but the old man would not allow himself to be interrupted. When Leroy had achieved some success in business, he changed his wife. The old one didn't seem suitable for his reputation as a solid businessman, but the new one was a model doll, young and stupid. She fit in well with his new image. We, of course, met, but we did not get along. And a couple of years after the second wedding, my son came to me and suggested moving in together. He wants to buy a cottage in the country, but the money is too tight. And if we sell my apartment, we won't have to scrimp. He made a heartfelt speech, saying, "You, Dad, are already of age. It's not good for you to live alone. I'm worried about you." Not that he convinced me, but he touched me. Of course, I admit, and I also somehow hoped that if he and his wife decided to expand and move out of town, it meant they were planning to have children. And I really wanted to take care of my grandchildren. So I agreed to the exchange and the move. The cottage was really nice. Leroy described it right, and my wing was even bigger than my old apartment. And it's organized beautifully. I just didn't get the reason for the move. Actually, there were 2 reasons. The first was that Doll, my son's new wife, had decided to breed dogs for sale. Yorkshire Terrier. In the apartment, it is inconvenient to do this, but in the cottage, it's the very time. I can't call them dogs, of course, they're guinea pigs, the old man said angrily. And the way she coddles them, it's disgusting to watch. She just doesn't kiss their asses, but she has something to do. That's good. Leroy's reason for moving was more serious. He was going into politics, running for mayor. His image maker came up with this strategy to take care of old people and pensioners. It's a good idea. They're the only people who seem to go to the polls. And to complete his image, he had to present his parents as an example of his care for the older generation. So he presented me. My father-in-law and mother-in-law didn't fit in, they were too young. But I fit right in. He gave me the best rooms, dressed me nicely, surrounded me with servants, showed guests and journalists. But he himself showed me exactly the same amount of attention as before the move. Sometimes we met for breakfast or at Square, but for the most part, he didn't need me. The family reunion didn't work out. I was just taken out of the closet like a set when guests came over and then pushed back into a dusty corner. But those conversations with guests were my only pleasure. They were really interesting people. Otherwise, I just rotted away in that cottage. Doll could only talk about her dogs. Her parents entertained themselves with soap operas, cheap novels, and shopping with their son-in-law's money. Helping the servants or doing anything themselves was not allowed. And socializing with them was also undesirable, although I did socialize anyway. Well, of course, the garden is really big, but except for it, there is nowhere to walk. The village is located on the side of the highway. It takes more than an hour to get to the city. Visiting an exhibition or a play now required freeing up a whole day, taking into account the road. And once I lived a stone's throw from most of the exhibition halls. I tried calling former neighbors to visit. It was inconvenient and tiresome for them to get there. They were all old, and those who came were shocked by the luxury of the main part of the house and felt uncomfortable. And even in my wing, where everything was decorated quite modestly, they could not come to themselves. In short, I found myself isolated, unable to lead the life I was accustomed to. I endured as long as I could, but then I asked my son to move me back to the city more than once. And each time he told me how important my presence was to his reputation. His reputation, you know. Nothing else. I threatened to leave on my own. I'd move in with an old acquaintance or an equally lonely pensioner or rent a room. My pension would be enough for that. And what do you think? He started locking me in my wing and put a guard on me. I lived under such close surveillance for about a year. Then Leroy's paranoia wore off. They took the guards away from me. You should have, Mr. Leroy interjected. No way, Mr. Leroy dismissed the old man. For me, those 6 months were the happiest I'd been in a long time. I may have eaten from the garbage. I may have been homeless. But I didn't have to play the part of a revered father to a loving son. You didn't even once give yourself the trouble to think about how disgusting, hurtful, humiliating it was. You just bought me off with comfort and thought that I should be grateful to you to the end of my life. Not only that, but also periodically instructed me on what to talk about with a particular person, how to build a conversation to bring him to the right topic, to bring him to some issue. He was training me like a spy, so I ran away like a spy. I left my phone and maps behind so they couldn't be traced. I wanted to take the documents at first, but then I thought I might get checked somewhere. I realized I'd be living on the street. They will look at my passport, identify me as the father of the head of the city, and spoil my son's reputation, which he is so concerned about. It won't be good. Anyway, I didn't think it was right to ruin Leroy's life. I just wanted to disappear from it. Unfortunately, Dad, I still need you in my life, the mayor said sternly. So pack up and let's go. There's nothing more for you to do here. I've got a campaign to run and I can't do it without you. Oh, it's not a good time, Grandpa, Alex sighed. I would have come tomorrow. I wouldn't even be here and you'd be looking for me. To hell with you. I'll go, but on 2 conditions. First, you get Julia a job with the city government at a decent salary. She has a degree in social work and she's a smart, savvy woman, so you'll meet her. And secondly, these young people, he nodded at me and my brother, they'll be coming to visit me every weekend, and Julia too, of course, if she wishes. And you mentioned reimbursing her for my allowance at the beginning. The old man had his way. Soon, Mom left the spice warehouse and went to work in the city administration, where in a few years she made a good career. With money in our family, everything got better. Now we went to the neighboring supermarket as customers every day and could not deny ourselves anything. And once a week, Leroy's car, on which we went to visit my grandfather, would roll up to our driveway. That's where Jay and I had a blast, running around the garden, squeezing funny little dogs, eating goodies, and talking with Grandpa Alex about everything. Often, my mother joined us. One of these visits coincided with another call in the evening at the landlord's house. It was there that Mom met Mr. Pablo. He soon became our stepfather, and he succeeded where we had failed. He managed to convince Leroy to let Grandpa come live with us. Leroy didn't mind. He failed in the gubernatorial election, after which he became completely disillusioned with politics and decided to go back into business. And for his reputation as a solid businessman, he didn't need his old father. Alex's grandfather lived to the age of 101, managed to keep a clear mind, natural vivacity, and a sense of dignity, and even managed to see his great-grandchildren, although, of course, they did not remember him, they were too young. So let them learn about him at least from my notes. This old man was worth keeping his memory alive. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.